All right, now if you have your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 25. And we're not going to read the whole chapter because this story is really long, but we're going to look at a few verses and then we're going to do some jumping back and forth. But we're going to stick on this story today because we got to see what was happening here. It was so amazing. And so we're going to read first from verses 1 to 5, and it says this in the New King James Version. It says, "Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Mon, whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. And she was a she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance. But the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. The name of his wife was Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding." Now, I want to give you a little bit of context to what is happening in this story because there's a lot of things in play. Now, Samuel was a great prophet. He was someone that was very important and very special to David, and he's now passed. And not only was he special to David, he was special to many, many, many people all around Israel at that time. And so he's passed away, and people are mourning. They're sad. They're sad for the loss of this great man who's impacted them so much. And so we have a bunch of people in this story who are mourning, including David. He was mourning the loss of his friend. But not only was he mourning, David was also on the run in this story because he was being chased by Saul. So Saul was not happy with David. He wasn't happy with the idea of David might ascend to the throne. And so Saul was actually hunting David, and David was a fugitive. So he was on the run trying to preserve his life, and he was roaming the deserts, and he was roaming the mountain country, and he ends up now in this area called Carmel. But while he was roaming around, he collected for himself a bunch of wild men. You ever hear about David and his mighty men? So as David is on the run and he's moving from village to village and town to town, he's collecting an army of men. So by the time he gets now to Carmel, he has a following of several hundred men with him. David was a boss. So now these men, they were amazing because they were committed to David. They were loyal to David. They believed in who he was. And so they had a few functions in David's life. One, they acted as his bodyguards. So they made sure that David was safe because they knew something was going to happen. They knew Saul was hunting David, and they knew David was appointed for something more. And so he has these friends around him who have decided, you know what? We're going to protect you with everything we have. We're going to protect you with our life. We're going to protect you with our sword. We're going to protect you with our body. And they became this army of men that protected David. And so he's got this mighty army of men who are like bodyguards watching over him and keeping him safe. But then they did something else. They weren't only protecting David. As they moved around and they were going around from place to place, they would act as protectors for the other people that they found in different villages. So as they were moving around and they would find shepherds in the field with their sheep, they would act as like these guerrilla military guys, and they would actually go out and protect the shepherds and their sheep. Because what was happening at that time is there was a bunch of wild bandits, a bunch of guys that would go around and they would take advantage of the shepherds. And they would overthrow them, they would beat them up, they would steal the sheep, they would kill the sheep, they would do all kinds of things. And so David and his guys decided, you know what, we're gonna act as protectors, and we're gonna act as like a military force and protect these shepherds in these small villages. Because in one moment, these wild gangs could wipe out a person's entire livelihood. In one moment, they could steal all their sheep, and that would be it. The man, the woman, the family had nothing to rely on because all of their livelihood, their livestock was gone. And see, when we look at the history of David, we know David was a shepherd before he became this man on the run. And so David understood what it was to be in that situation. He understood what it was to care for sheep. He understood the danger and the toil and the isolation and the loneliness. He understood how vulnerable a shepherd was while he took care of his sheep. And so David decided with his mighty men that as they were on the move, they would make sure that they would protect every shepherd that they came across and make sure that they were safe. And there was one man in particular that they did this for. And we see this in verse 2. This man is introduced to us. His name is Nabal. And Nabal's shepherds were out in the fields in the Mount of Carmel in that area. And they had his 3,000 sheep. The Bible says that he had 3,000 sheep and he had 1,000 goats. He was a very, very wealthy man at this point in time. 3,000 sheep, that's a lot. 1,000 goats, that's a lot. And so his shepherds now are in the fields and they're tending to the sheep. And David decided, you know what? We're going to help this guy. We're going to make sure that his shepherds are protected and that his sheep are protected and that their livelihood is safe. There's going to be no loss of life, no loss of sheep. Everybody's going to do well. And so we see here in verse 2, this guy named Nabal is introduced to us, and he's wealthy, and he's affluent, and he has this beautiful wife named Abigail. But the Bible also tells us that he was a surly man. The Bible also tells us that he was a man of bad behavior. He was a man that did not have good character. He was a man that behaved terribly. Surly means bad. And we see that he was good at business because he had a lot of sheep. He had a lot of livestock. He was a wealthy man. You don't become wealthy by being dumb. He was a smart man. He was a businessman. He was good at business. But you know what he wasn't good at? He wasn't good at people. And he was good at crunching the numbers, and he was good at finding ways to make money, but he wasn't good with dealing with people, his wife included. And so he had this reputation about having a lot of money and having a lot of status, but having really, really bad character. Have you ever met anybody like that? You don't have to raise your hands. Don't call anybody out today. It's just rhetorical. Have you ever met anybody like that who seem like they have it going on? They've got a nice big business. They've got stuff going on. They've got money in the bank. They've got a beautiful big house. They've got nice cars. They look like they're walking in the stuff, like they look like they are it. But then when you get to meet them and you begin to interact with them and you begin to talk to them, you realize these people suck. Their character sucks. They're miserable. They're backbiting. They pull you down. They elevate themselves. They're proud. They're haughty. They make you feel like you're nothing. These people have no character. And this was the situation that we find Nabal in, that he had a lot of money and he had a lot of wealth, but he did not have good character. We find here in this story that not only was Nabal rude and selfish and miserable, and he sucked with his character, he was also godless. Did you know that there is a difference between character and personality? They're actually not the same. And a lot of times people get the two confused and we use those terms interchangeably. Oh, they have great personality. Oh, they have great character. But they're actually two very different things. They're not the same. Personality and character are similar in the sense that they come from our behavior, or they're emanated in our behavior, but they actually have two different sources. And so with personality, we see everybody has a personality. Every single person in this place today, you have a personality. When I was reading this and doing some research on this, I remembered the song. I don't know if you remember it. I might be dating myself. There was a Cheese Whiz commercial back in the day. Cheese Whiz has personality. Do you guys remember that? But everybody has personality. Not the Cheese Whiz. It's not real. But everybody here in this house has personality. And some people, their personalities are you know what? They're like just naturally funny. And some people are naturally easygoing. And some people are naturally easy to get along with. And there are some people who are just naturally creative and optimistic and confident and energetic. And then there's people who are just naturally, they're just shy. That's just who they are. They're not that easygoing. That's just who they are. They're not optimistic, but they're the opposite. They're negative. And these things all feed into our personality. And when we talk about personality, we're actually talking about the things that we inherit. One person said this: our personality is linked to our biology. It is the inherent qualities of who we are, our natural inclinations. Your personality is built into your biology. Whew. But our character is different. Character is tied directly to what you believe. At the core of character is your core beliefs. At the core of character is what you believe. It's what your ethics are. How do you conduct yourself ethically? It's what your morals are. What are the moral standards that you hold to? It's your social standards. It's all of these things. It's what you believe. What do you believe to be right? What do you believe to be wrong? This is where your character comes from. It comes from your core beliefs. So your personality is the traits that you've inherited, your natural inclinations, your biology, but your character is directly linked to what you believe. So if you look at this, if you have a core belief in God, if you are saved in this house and you call yourself a child of God this morning, then your core beliefs should reflect the core beliefs of God. Your character should reflect the core beliefs of God. You should be walking in honesty. You should be walking in loyalty and integrity and generosity and love and forgiveness. These are all the things that God is, and these are the things that we should be if we call ourselves truly children of God. But when there is no belief in God, your character will spew out then evil and every imaginary wickedness that you could think of. And this is where we find Nabal. Nabal was a man with bad character. He was a man that was godless. He was a man that did not know how to live or treat people right. The Bible actually tells us that his name means fool. Nabal means fool. You ever want to insult anybody but not really call them a fool? So, yo, man, you're such a Nabal. But Nabal actually means fool. But it doesn't mean that he was simple-minded. And it doesn't mean that he was absent-minded or that he didn't know what he was doing, because he did. We see that because he was wealthy. So being a fool didn't mean that he didn't know what he was doing, because you can't be a fool and be simple-minded and have great wealth. The two don't line up. He was a rich man. He was wealthy. He was running 3,000 sheep deep. He was not a simple man. But the Bible tells us what the definition of a fool is. The Bible tells us that someone who says there is no God is a fool. And this is where we find Nabal. Nabal was denying God. He was not living for God. He was living for himself. And in his choices, in his denial of God, it made him a fool. And we see this another time with another character by the name of Judas. You guys remember Judas? Judas, that guy. Judas played the fool. He acted the fool because he denied Christ. He denied God, the living God, the epitome of love that is standing right there in front of him. Judas decides, you know what? The 30 pieces of silver is worth more than this genuine love that is standing in front of me. See, love is the master key that opens the gates of happiness, and Judas decided he was going to reject that and take all the money. He decided that he was going to act in greed and act in his own selfishness and act in a manner that would increase himself and betrayed Jesus, and he acted the fool. He pursued ambition, he pursued greed, and he sold Jesus out. He acted the fool. We find in history and in this story particularly that greed always means that someone else must suffer, because it's one taking from the other. And in Judas's greed, the innocent one, Jesus, suffered. And we can see that he was also a man that was a fool. He acted the fool, he played the part, and now we've got two great examples, Judas and Nabal. When God is in your heart, friends, when God is in your heart, it will mean the difference between you being victorious and not. When God is in your heart, it will mean the difference between your display of good character and bad. It will mean the difference between you making good choices and foolish choices. And Nabal was a fool. because he chose to deny God and he rejected God and he lived his life in that manner. You might find it surprising today, but God actually is more concerned about your character than he is about what you have. God is more concerned about what you believe and how you live than he is with what you rode to work in this morning or yesterday or this week. He's more concerned with your character than what it is that you have in your possession, your big house, your nice car, your big fat wallet, your big fat bank account. God is more concerned about you and your character than your possessions. And Nabal had great possessions, but his bad character stood out. Your character is what counts. Your possessions mean nothing. It is your character that carries all the weight. The Bible says this, it says that it is better to have a good name than great riches. It is better for people to speak well of you, to know who you are, for you to walk in great character. It is a better thing for you to have a good name than for you to have a big house. It is better for you to have a good name than for you to have a big bank account. And the Holy Spirit wants us to pay attention to this truth, because when we live in this world and we watch the world and we see what's happening around us, the world puts so much emphasis on possessions. The world puts so much emphasis on what you have and how popular you are and who knows your name and what you're driving and what your 401k says and what kind of designer wear you're wearing. The world puts so much emphasis on our things, and then they decide that based on the things you have, that determines your importance. So the more you have, the more important you are. The less you have, the less important you are. And so the world puts so much emphasis on our possessions, our popularity, how much money is in your bank account. But these things are not what God counts. And it's sad because there are so many people in the kingdom who also hold themselves to the worldly standards. And so they decide that they're important when they hit a certain salary. And they decide that they're important when they get a certain type of job. And they decide that they'll be important by the time they get the big house, the detached, 4-bedroom, 2-car garage. They decide that their things is what makes them important instead of what God says makes them important. And so there are too many people, sadly, in the church who make the world's measure their own measure. But that's not how it works in God's economy, friends. God puts attention and he places great weight on our character. He puts lots of attention and places great weight on our character. He is more concerned with your character than your level of comfort. He wants you to have nice things, but not at the expense of your character. And so when God, we see in the Bible, when God was looking for a king, he says to Samuel, he says, man looks on the outward appearance, but I look at the heart. When God was looking to promote, when God was looking for a man to walk in greatness, to walk in importance, when he was looking for the one who would walk as a king, he didn't look at how beautiful he looked. He didn't look at his education. He didn't look at what he had, what he owned, what he possessed. He didn't look at his family lineage. No, God looked at his heart. And he said, what kind of man is he? What are his core beliefs? What is his character? That's the guy that I want. I want the man with a good heart. God looked at the heart. He was looking for character, not personality. The importance is in your character, friends, not in your possessions. You know, when someone dies, if they're wealthy, sometimes people might talk about their great wealth. They might talk about the house and the cars and the business that they had. They might talk about how much money that they had. They might talk about how it's going to get divided and who's getting what. But you know what really stands out when someone passes away? What kind of person were they? What was their character? And that's when you hear it, you know, oh, this guy was a terrible guy. He was ruthless. He was a bad dad. She was a bad mom. All she did was ever work. All he did was ever lay it hard into me. He never lifted me up. He never encouraged me. He always condemned me. And then you find out after a person passes what people really think. And so we might talk about the nice big riches and the cars and all that stuff, but you know what? What we remember is the kindness. Was that person kind? Were they generous? Were they compassionate? Were they a man or woman of great character? They will talk about what kind of person were you really? Outside of the things, who are you? Outside of the things, who were you in this world? And so we see here in verses 4 to 10, and we're not going to read all of it because it's kind of long, but I just want to tell you what's happening. So we see that we're introduced to this guy, Nabal, and we're introduced to his beautiful wife, who's really amazing and brilliant and had good understanding. And it's sheep shearing time. So Nabal's shepherds were out in the fields, and now they come in and they're shearing the sheep, and it's time for them to shave off, all the big wool. You ever see those videos? They're shaving off all the big wool because it's moving into summertime and it's going to get hot, and so they're making the sheep more comfortable for the summer. But after sheep shearing, there's always a big party. They have a festival. They have a big dinner. They have people come over. They celebrate. Hey, we just had a really good season. Our sheep are doing well. They're all alive. We just got all this great wool. And so they have a big feast, and they have a celebration, and they invite their friends and their neighbors. And over in the wilderness, where David and his men are, they know that there's a party going on at Nabal's house. Now, these guys have been in the wilderness for a while. They're hungry. They're thirsty. They would probably appreciate a good meal. And so David decides, you know what? We did such a great job for Nabal. We actually took care of him, and we're part of the reason why he can have this great big celebration, because we looked after his shepherds. So he's like, you know what? I'm gonna send some men to Nabal's house. I'm gonna tell him, hey, while your shepherds were in the field, we looked after them, we took care of them. Can you share with us some of your food and your drinks and some of the festivities that you're celebrating now? Can you share it with us? We're hungry. So David sends his men, and he goes into the city, and they ask Nabal for some provisions for himself and his soldiers. Now, it wasn't unreasonable, given that David had really helped Nabal out. But then we see here that Nabal lived up to his reputation and his name of being a fool. And when David's men came to him, Nabal refused to give them anything. He's like, who is this David guy? I don't care who David is. Who is Jesse? Who is David, the son of Jesse? I don't care who this guy is. Who is he that I should be giving him any of my resources? And we see in verse 10 and 11, he says here, many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men who are coming from who knows where? In other words, Nabal was saying, David, I don't care who you are. Who do you think you are, sending your men into my house and asking me for my food and my resources and my meat? Who do you think you are, David? No way, I'm not giving you anything. And he sent the men away, and he said, you get nothing. And he actually lambasted David. Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Who does he think that he is, that he can send someone and all you men to my house and ask me for my food? He insulted David. And then David's men go back and they tell him how foolish and arrogant Nabal was acting. David had done great good for Nabal without request. David did it out of the goodness of his heart, out of understanding what it was to be a shepherd, out of understanding what it was to have people in the field at night, understanding that there were these gangs out there that were seeking to rob people of their livelihood. David said, you know what? I'm going to do this guy a solid, and I'm going to help him out, and I'm going to watch over his sheep. Without asking. Nabal never asked David, but David said, I'm going to do this for you. And now to David expected a little bit of a thank you. And Nabal says, nope, we're not doing anything. And he sent the men away empty-handed. Now the men go back and they tell David all that happened, and David gets angry. David gets angry. He gets so mad because he realized that this guy was acting like a fool. And in his acting, the way he acted, Nabal revealed his character. And there's so many times when we see, in times of difficulty, in times of adversity, in times of problems, in times when things are stressful, we actually see what our true character is. It is in those times when things are hard and those times when things are tight that we actually get to see who we really are. Because our reaction and the way we respond to things tells us what we believe at our core. How you respond to hard times and adversity tells you who you really are. The Bible says in James 1:3, it says, "You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open, and it shows its true colors." Your faith life shows its true colors. When the pressure is on, when things are tight, and you are responding, what you respond and how you respond shows your true colors. And we see here that Nabal's true colors were showing because he told David's men exactly what he thought of David and where he thought David should go. And because of this, David gets all angry. And we see that in life sometimes, you know, when people offend us, when people do things that are not nice, when people don't act well around us, and they might step on our toes, or they might say things that they shouldn't say, the way we react shows who we are. The way we react to things shows what we really believe. When people can't get their way, they show you who they are. When people are mad at you and they can't handle life, they show you who you are. When people think you're doing something you're not supposed to do, they show you who you are, who they are. And this is what's happening in this story. Nabal is revealing his true colors to everybody. Look at this, guys. Adversity and pressure will introduce you to yourself and what you believe. Adversity and pressure will introduce you to yourself and what you really believe. Let me say that again. Adversity and pressure will introduce you to yourself and what you really believe. That is when your character truly comes out. So you can kind of fake it a little bit sometimes, but when the pressure is on, you can't fake it. What's inside is coming out. And what's inside will come out. There's no hiding it at that point. The pressure is on. And you will quickly find out what's in your heart when you face pressures and problems and adversities. We've seen it so many times as pastors at KICC. Don't worry, I'm not going to point anybody out. We've seen it so many times when things happen and the situation calls for grace and it calls for compassion and it calls for forgiveness. When the situation calls for faith and it calls for holiness. When the situation calls for you to live like a child of God. You know, all the time you're praising, you're lifting your hands up, you're hallelujah-ing, you're dancing up and down the aisles. But then when the pressure is on and you are required to actually act like a child of God, something else comes out. When you are faced with the demand to show generosity, something else comes out. When you're faced with the demand to show grace, something else comes out. When you're faced with the demand to walk in faith, something else comes out. And you see in adversity and pressure, what comes out reveals your character. And there are people, when they're pressured, their character is not good. They cuss you. They belittle you. They pull you down. They ghost you. They post about you on social media. They talk to you about you to their friends. They lambaste your name. There is no godliness inside of them. They kill you with their words. When adversity and pressure are on, then you will see who you really are. And everybody else will too. When the pressure is on, do you have godly character or not? When we are faced with adversity or pressure, many people give up their beliefs and they just walk away from God. So you know what? It's too hard to walk in grace. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be mad at you for the rest of my days. It's too hard for me to forgive you. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be offended by you for the next 6 years. It's too hard for me to walk in faith. I'm not going to believe God for my miracle. I'm just going to listen to what the doctor says and condemn myself to a life of sickness. It's too hard to do what God says. It's too hard to walk as in good character. It's too hard. So I'm going to give it all up. I'm going to throw it away, and I'm going to walk the way of the world. And there are so many times when people choose to walk in doubt instead of faith. And they turn to the world for their relief. Instead of coming to the altar and believing, God, you're going to do it. God, you're going to do it. You said it. I believe it. I don't care what the doctor's report says. God, you're going to do it. You're going to heal my body. I don't care what my bank account says. God, you're going to do it. You're going to bless me. I don't care that my kids are wayward right now because I know what you said. They're going to serve you. And there are too many times when we choose to walk the opposite direction instead of running towards the one who says, just come to me, have faith in me, I will do it. And so now we see Abigail is in the middle of this mess. So we have Nabal the foolish, who has just lambasted David and insulted him and told him where to go, in as many words as he needed to use. And then we have David now, who the message has been sent to David, and he's angry. He's mad. David is vexed. David is like, who is this guy to say that to me? Does he not know who I am? Does he not know what I did for him? Who is he to tell me where to go and how to get there? David is enraged by Nabal's response. He's enraged by his greed and his harshness. He's enraged with the fact that Nabal repaid David's good with evil. Has that ever happened to you? Where you're doing something that is good for someone, and they turn around and they slap you in the face, and they repay your goodness with evil? That's exactly what's happening with David. And so he's so angry now. And he's like, that's it. Like, who does this guy think he is? And he calls his army and he says, 400 of you arm yourselves, we're going. 400 men. Remember, he had several hundred men with him. He calls 400 of his men and he says, that's it. We're going into Nabal's territory and we're going to take him out. Arm yourselves, get your swords, get your shields, get yourself ready. We are about to march on Nabal's little village, and we are going to destroy them. And we can see here now, so Nabal responds to David's goodness with evil, and now David is responding to Nabal's evil with evil. Two wrongs are not going to make a right. Two wrongs never make a right. When someone presses on you and does something to you, when you're in a tough situation, responding to hurt them, responding to get revenge, responding to take it out on them is never going to fix the situation. And so we see here, David is about ready to march with his 400 men, and they're going to put a beating on Nabal. They're going to wipe him out. Like, it was going to be, there was a man named Nabal, the end. Like, Nabal was done. He wasn't going to survive this. And so David here in his response for showing evil for evil, he too is showing that his character also needs some work. And he also has some flaws. So we have Nabal, who's a fool, who discounts David's goodness. And we have David, who's angry and who's going to repay evil for evil. David's reaction was just as bad and just as sinful as Nabal's. David's reaction was just as bad and just as sinful as Nabal's. There's no difference here. David is also acting wrong. And you know, when people hurt us, we get in this mindset sometimes, and you don't have to put your hands up, but I know what happens. You want to fix them. Who do they think they are? Who do they think they are to talk to me like that? I'm going to talk back to them like that. Who do they think they are to step on my toes? I'm going to step on both of their feet next time. Who do they think they are? You want to get back at them for what they did. They hurt you, so you're going to hurt them. How many times do we see that in marriage and you don't have to put your hand up? One husband, one wife, one hurts the other decides, I'm going to hurt you back. You yell at me, I'm going to yell at you. You insult me, I'm going to insult you. You hit me, I'm going to hit you. Don't hit each other, okay? You cheat on me, I'm going to cheat on you. You walk out on me, I'm going to walk out on you. You lambaste me, I'm going to lambaste you. And it never fixes anything. It creates a bigger mess. And so here, revenge is on David's mind. He's going to get him back. He's like, I did good for you, and this is what you do to me? I'm going to get you back. But this is a sin. David, too, is sinning. He had no mercy, and he was acting just as cruel as Nabal. You know, sometimes we feel justified. If someone does something to us first and we do it back, we feel justified because they did it first. Like, you stepped on my toe first. So if I step on you, you did it first. So I'm justified in my actions because you offended first. You hurt me first. You did it first. But there's no justification, friends. An eye for an eye is a sin. An eye for an eye is the law, and that's not who we are anymore. We are in grace. And so here's David responding with an eye for an eye, evil for evil. And it was about to blow up. It was about to get really, really, really bad. And the thing we see here with David is that, sure, he goes to Nabal, he asks for food. And while David was a man who knew God, he wasn't really relying on God in this moment. Because why would he get so angry if Nabal said no? If his source was really God, then he'd be like, okay, it's not you, it's somewhere else. But it's coming. And you know, sometimes in life we think that our source, our blessing is going to come from one spout, but it doesn't happen, and then we get angry, like, what's happening? Why didn't this? It's not that one. It's coming from somewhere else. But David didn't believe that. He was so angry. He thought that it was supposed to come from Nabal, and he wasn't relying on God in this moment to say, God, you're just going to send it from somewhere else. And so we've got angry David, we've got foolish Nabal, who actually has no idea at this point that David's planning to attack him, because he just sends the men away, and the men have gone and reported back to David, and then David now has armed his army. And so here comes Abigail into this story. And a servant of hers found out what was happening. He learned about what Nabal did and what he said. He learned about the fact that David was angry, he was vexed, he was coming with his army. And the servant was like, this is going to be a disaster. Like, something has to stop. Something has to change. We're about to die. And so he goes to Abigail and he says, Abigail, something bad is about to happen. Abigail, your stupid husband offended David, and now David is coming with his army. But David was good to us. David protected us. David helped us. David is the reason why we're partying right now. And your husband has sent an insult to him. And now David is coming to attack. And he reminded her that David actually was good to us. And now doom is pending. And so Abigail quickly, she knew what was about to happen. She knew what was going to happen when this giant slayer David came into her village. She knew that when a mighty man, a mighty warrior like David got angered and was on his way, she knew that he was provoked to wrath. She knew that her entire village, all of the people that lived with her, her family, her friends, everybody now was at risk because of her husband. And so, instead of acting impulsively, instead of acting and escalating the situation, she made a decisive decision. See, there are a few things Abigail could have done in this situation. When she got the news, she could have run right to her husband and said, you stupid fool, you've angered David, he's coming to destroy us. She could have packed up her things and head for the hills. She'd be like, you know what, Nabal, this is all you. Goodbye. Get my things. I'm out. I'm on my donkey. I'm in the next village. She could have ran. But what did she do? The Bible says this. She quickly grabbed provisions and rode out to meet David, who was heading towards her village to seek revenge against Nabal. She didn't run. She didn't escalate. She ran towards David. And we see here that she knew what was inside of her was far greater than what was coming towards her. What's inside of you today, friends, is far greater than anything that comes to your plate. What's inside of you today is far greater than anything that comes to your doorstep. What is inside of you is greater than anything this world can throw at you. And she knew what was inside of her was greater than what any adversity that she was about to face. And so she gets on her donkey, and she grabs a bunch of things, and she packs up a lot of stuff, and she starts heading towards David. Not from him, towards him. Man, this woman, she's one of the greatest women in the Bible. She really is. She doesn't get enough recognition. There are so many things that separated her in this moment. She was brave. She was decisive. She was wise. But you know the greatest thing? She was the only woman in the Bible who understood men. She knew. She's like, I know this guy that I've been married to, and I know what he's done. And I know of David. She hasn't met him yet, but she knows of him. David, the giant slayer. David, the mighty warrior. David, the man who did not fear anything. It was him and his God. She knew of David. She knew her husband. And so she decides to run towards David, and she was able to diffuse David and address his anger. And it's so amazing how she did it. She actually rode to him, and the Bible tells us in verse 23 that she quickly got off her donkey when she approached him and bowed before David with her face to the ground. And she fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my Lord. Let me speak to you and hear what I have to say." She ran towards an army of 400 angry men. She ran towards men who were armed. She ran towards those who were seeking her destruction. Not because of her actions. She had nothing to do with this situation. It was her husband and David, and she was caught in the middle, and she realized something has to be done or this is going to end very badly. She had nothing to do with this. She didn't address David. She didn't address David's men. She had no idea what David had done. She has nothing to do with this. But here she is. She gets on her donkey, and she runs towards 400 angry men. And she takes complete responsibility for her husband's cruel and stupid and foolish decision. It wasn't hers. It wasn't her fault. She did nothing in this situation. She could have ran away and protected herself, but you know what Abigail did? She took responsibility for what was happening, and she took responsibility for her husband, and she went to David, and she humbled herself before him, and she said, "Lord, if you would let me speak for a moment, I need to address you." She went, and you can read the rest of it when you go home, but she went and she began to edify David. She went and she began to prophesy into his life. "I know who you are, David. I know what you're going to do. I know what you're going to become. David, I know that you are a man of this. David, I know that you are understanding who God is. David, please listen to me." And she begins to prophesy into his life. And she accepted fault in a situation that was not hers because she understood and she saw the bigger picture. The key to humility is understanding the bigger picture. It's easy to react when someone steps on your toes. It's easy for that to be the default and to cut a relationship and to react and to hurt somebody else. It's easy to do those things. But the humble thing to do would be to remember the bigger picture. I am a child of God. This is my brother. This is my sister. We are children of God together. We are called to a higher standard. There is a bigger picture in play. And Abigail understood there was a bigger picture in play. And so she humbled herself and she went to David. And church, we need to be like Abigail. We need to be, when we're in tight situations, we need to understand that we need to humble ourselves. And we need to not react. And we need to not fight. And we need to not war. But we need to stand in grace. And we need to stand in love and forgiveness. And we need to seek to bring the solution to a good end, because there is a bigger picture in play. We have to look past our own superiority and self-importance and think, oh, I'm so good. Do you know who I am? How could you do that to me? We have to understand that there are things happening around us and with us that are greater than ourselves. The kingdom is greater than us. The call of God is greater than what you might be feeling. The offense is greater than what God has called you to do. Or not, the call of God is greater than the offense that you're dealing with. She humbled herself. She looked at David and she said, please listen to what I have to say. She acted in great wisdom. She was brave. Can you imagine a woman riding up to 400 warring, angry men? Like David had them, they were ready to go. They were ready to slaughter Nabal and his entire village. And she humbled herself. And she remembered, I know I don't have nothing to do with this, but there's a bigger picture. There are innocent people in my village, and they're about to die. How many times do innocent people die in our offenses? How many times do we lose those around us who have nothing to do with it, but they see how we're reacting and they see how we're dealing, and we're like, I don't want anything to do with that. And in this situation, the innocent are about to be lost, and she realizes, if I don't do something, if I don't humble myself, if I don't run to David, my village will be lost. My family will be lost. These people have nothing to do with what Nabal did. Doesn't that sound a lot like Jesus? He humbled himself and went to the cross. He didn't do any of the things we've done. He didn't do any of it. He's never sinned. He's never murdered. He's never lied. He's never cheated. He's never ever gossiped. He's never hurt anybody. He's never abused. He's never done drugs. He's never done any of those things. He's never prostituted himself. He never did any of those things. But Jesus took the humility of the world, stood in humility, and he took the sins of the world, and he went to the cross, and he paid for something that he did not do. His humbleness silenced the enemy for us. He took the weight of our wrong and our sin, and he silenced the enemy for us, the innocent Lamb of God. Philippians 2:8 says this in the NIV, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. He silenced the demand for revenge and justice. And he expects us to silence the demand for revenge and justice. He expects us, friends, to silence the demand for revenge and justice. That's not who we are anymore. If you're a child of God in this house and you've given your life to Jesus and you've surrendered, that is not who you are anymore. That is not who you are anymore. That is not who you are anymore, friends. That is not who we are anymore. Revenge cannot be a forefront in our minds anymore. In humility, Jesus conquered his enemies. In her humility, Abigail persuaded David and changed his mind. And David took the provisions, and he took his men, and he went back to his camp. And Nabal had no clue that he was just saved from certain death. She didn't say a word. She took it on herself and she said, I'm going to fix this. And I'm going to humble myself before the man that seeks to attack us, and I'm going to bring this situation to an end. She led David to change his mind about Nabal and killing the entire household. She took responsibility for her foolish husband's actions, but she saved lives. She saved her house. She saved her friends. Listen, friends, life is not always fair. It doesn't always deal with us nicely. It would be great if we never had any problems. It would be great if we never had any struggles. It would be fantastic, but that's not life on this world, in this world. That's not life on this earth. It's not fair sometimes. And things happen that shouldn't happen to us. And things happen around us that shouldn't happen. But how we deal with those things speaks directly to what we believe of who we are and how we're supposed to act. Life is not fair, but we need to always remember that there is a bigger picture. And even though we want to react, and even though we want to seek revenge, the bigger picture is that I need to walk in grace. The bigger picture is that I need to walk in love and forgiveness. The bigger picture is that I am now a child of God, and my character should reflect that of my Father. There is a bigger picture in play. I'm not going to deny it hurts. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes the wounds come from people you would never expect. Sometimes the insults come from people you would never expect. But that is not who we are. We are required to silence revenge and justice. When we humble ourselves, we will save lives. When we humble ourselves, we will save our integrity. Oh my gosh. You know when you just decide to live and act like God instead of live and act like yourself? You save your integrity. Integrity takes so long to build, and you can lose it in a moment when you act foolishly. It'll save your friendships. Man, you know what? We're going to trip over each other's shoes sometimes. We're going to trip over each other's feet. We're not perfect, but how you deal with it will either result in you saving the friendship or losing it. We are called to save our marriages. Oh my gosh, husbands and wives today, if you would just live humbly before each other, you will save so much strife. It's not about being right. It's not about taking action. It's about being humble and saving what's around you and remembering the bigger picture. I'm going to bring this to a close, but I want to share one more scripture with you. It's in James 4:10. The King James Version, it says this, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. Not only did Abigail's humility save her people and save her husband, because she saved him, but it also propelled her into her destiny. It also propelled her into what God had for her. See, when all of this was happening and Nabal was at home and he was throwing a party and he was getting drunk and he had no clue, he had no idea that David was about to come and take him out. She didn't say anything to him because she understood this guy is not in the frame of mind where I can have this conversation with him. And so she waited until the next day, and she went to her husband and she said, you know what you said to David? And how you told him where to go and how to get there, and he was really mad at you. He was coming to kill you. He had 400 men who were armed, and they were on their way to our village yesterday. And not only would he have taken you out, you put at risk everybody that's around us. Not only did your actions, were they going to kill you, they were going to kill everyone around you. Sometimes the things we do kills the beautiful things around us. And so not only were you going to be slaughtered yourself, Nabal, my foolish husband, but you also put all of us at risk, and we were almost all going to die. But this is what I did. I went out to David, and I gave him food, and I persuaded him. And he's not coming to get you anymore. And verse 37 says that when she told Nabal everything, his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And then 10 days later, he passed away. Now, when David heard that Nabal was dead, because the news went through the Israel grapevine, and people found out that Nabal was dead, and David found out that Nabal was dead, you know what he did? He sent messengers to Abigail, and he said, hey, do you want to be my wife? He was so impressed with Abigail. He was so impressed with the woman that she was, the fact that she was able to stand against him and his army and persuade him and reason with him and prophesy to him who he was going to be. He was so persuaded by her. He said, you know what? This woman is amazing. I need her in my life. And so he sends a message and he says, hey, do you want to be my wife? And She from her humble position, after saving her husband and all of the servants and all of their belongings, and her heart was right before God, and she had no evil intention. And so David sends this message, and you know what she did? She quickly packed up her things, and she says, yes! And she was on a donkey and on her way to David. But you know what? Abigail endured years of cruelty, years of abuse, years of being under the hand of a foolish man, and now she was stepping into her future as a queen. There are so many times in life where you've been through abuse, and we have been through hard times, and we have been through things that have sought to break us down and sought to pull us down and sought to distract us and discourage us from what God has called us to do. But I want to tell you today, friend, that there is a hope that is greater. There is a hope that is greater, and you too will then step into the destiny that God has for you. In her humble position, she moved to a powerful position. And the same will happen with us. The times we are living in, they're not going to get better. If you look around the world and you see what's happening, we are just being positioned for the return of Christ. That we can't control. That's going to happen. It's all prophetic. It has to happen. But what we can control is who we are in the midst of these storms. And what we can control is our character. What is it that what do we believe? What are our core beliefs? What we can control is how we react and how we respond to difficult situations. We need to walk in humility, friends, just as Jesus did, so we can win the more. And we need to be good examples and walk in godly character, because the picture is bigger than us. We are in the end days, friends. We are in the last mile home. Never in history has there ever been more signs for the return of Christ than there is right now in this time. The picture is bigger than us. Would you stand with me today, please? Simeon, if you could, please. Now more than ever, we need to make sure that our character aligns with God's. Now more than ever, we need to ensure that our character is godly. We need to stand in righteousness and holiness and grace. We need to stand and put away the things of this world.